Maybe he's like half asleep. Hello. I forgot to set up the stream. I was in the studio and I forgot to set it up, but I've got some lovely guests and we're going to be talking about AI today. I've been told not to scream into the microphone, but AI is a very screamy thing. Anyway, I'm going to introduce the very lovely Fraser Birks, who's got a show up about it's about what is it? How to avoid the AI apocalypse. I'm going to let him introduce himself, and we will. Oh, and there's Caron, who is running Cyberia, and somebody is she's taken herself out. Right, so you're very echoey, Fraser. We had a problem today. My echoey for you.
Yeah, sorry. No, you're okay. Sorry, I think I'll turn the mic down a little bit. Is that better? Sorry, I don't have any headphones with me, which is the problem.
It might be. Yes.
Is my audio
it's fine. Yes, we had this problem the other day. No, it's still echoey.
Okay, great. Yeah, hello. Yes.
Like that. Caron, is it coming through like that? So this is going to be a bit of an echo fest, really. I tell you what, I'll ask you a question, and then I'll turn my microphone off, and then you turn yours off when I'm talking. Hang on a minute. Let's do that.
Sounds great.
The technicalities of things. So I went to see Judy Boom, who I interviewed the other day, her show called Apocalypse Kapow, where she talked very much about training Alexa like a baby, and there's other things. That's probably a big spoiler for her show, but other things. And then I was like, what else can I see? And then I saw, because the amazing app and the WBB, the Weebly book, that Fraser was doing a talk in the Science and Rationalism with a very similar subject, with actually practical, probably, ways to solve it. I'm not sure, really. But yeah, do you want to talk
about... Yeah, sure. So, hello. Yeah, so my name's Fraser, and yeah, I'm doing a show called How to Avoid an AI Apocalypse. So yeah, it's all about basically, I guess, talking about the real fears around AI rather than I think the kind of the stuff that turns up in the media, because a lot of what turns up in the media is correct, like talking about maybe the worries of AI becoming sentient, but also a lot of it is kind of from the perspective of maybe like, you know, like AI being the Terminator, that kind of thing. And I really wanted to kind of get down to the base of it. So because I'm a PhD student, so what I do really is I work with AI quite a lot, and I know quite a lot about it. So I'm sort of here to educate people, both in terms of like I guess how scary AI will be, but also what aspects they should really be scared of, I think is the most important thing. Yeah. Oh, your mic's muted, by the way.
Is there anything you can tell us about what we should be scared about without spoiling your show?
So there's a couple of things. So I think it definitely is the case that we probably should be a bit worried about the growth of these big language models, like ChatGPT. Everyone's probably used ChatGPT. Like those kind of language models, they are getting bigger and better as the years going on. Really, only in the last 6 months they've become properly quite scary. And you are starting to see some things emerge in those which aren't planned by the people who made them. So things like being able to use tools, which is something they're not really designed to do, but they suddenly can do, and things like that. And there's also some other things as well. So yes, these large language models are worrying, but also things like deepfakes are quite worrying, right? People probably heard of deepfakes, and that's a really major way that AI is used these days, and as well as how it's using propaganda and stuff like that. So I think that AI, yes, there is this fear about it being sentient, and that is something we probably should be a bit worried about, but we can't really do too much to control that. But one thing that we can be more aware of, and we can push regulation on, definitely, is things like deepfakes, which definitely, do affect our lives and are affecting people. So it is worth getting more educated about them, and that's basically what my show is all about, really. Yeah,
because it was a fascinating show. It was entertaining. It's a science talk, but it was like an interesting science talk, which is a skill to have. So well done with that. But it was I mean, you were talking about deep fakes and AI generated faces and voices and everything like that, and that's very much what the actor strike is in Hollywood and beyond Hollywood at the moment, because people are talking about scanning an extra. At the moment, it's just like background artists scanning their image, and forevermore they're probably not going to have rights to their images, and it's going to affect their future work. But it's going to go beyond that. Surely it's if you can do something, then you'll expand it to make everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So like, I think that the thing you mentioned about the actor strike is a really, really good point, because of course actors are some of the most pictured people on the entire planet, right? So the fact that they have so much information, so much data of their face available means they can make some really quite sophisticated deepfakes. And then currently, all those pictures are owned by the film companies, not by the actors, which means that deepfakes aren't owned by the actors, so they can really lose their livelihoods over this. But yeah, there's other things as well. Like, for example, you might have seen recently there was a bit of a Martin Lewis deepfake. If you don't know who Martin Lewis is, he's kind of like the money saving expert type guy. And someone deepfaked him into like a kind of cryptocurrency scam ad thing, right? And that's pretty scary. But luckily, that one wasn't particularly convincing. It was quite bad. So you wouldn't imagine that anyone really fell for it. But you could imagine maybe in the next few years, maybe even in 1 year's time or something, as these deepfakes become easier to make and more accessible for the average person, we could start seeing scarier deepfakes, definitely anything on things like social media. So people could start, it could start to really affect us, and we could start to have to be quite worried about, is this video of this politician I'm seeing or this notable figure, is that real or is it a deepfake? And are they saying something that they never actually really said? So yeah, it is worrying. Yeah.
The thing is, it was already worrying because, I mean, people are very easily convinced by things. I mean, even without deep fakes, there's a thing that was going around with Gloria Hunniford selling CBD gummies, which of course she never actually did, but it was enough to convince my mother that it must be legitimate and spend. Sorry, Mum, but you did spend quite a lot of money on CBD gummies, which are used. It's just jelly beans, really. So it doesn't take an awful. She's probably going to smack me on the head from this, but it doesn't take an awful lot to convince people, because I mean, just the slightest thing. I know there's this whole thing about uncanny valley, but if you're, people don't necessarily. I don't think it's gone beyond that stage. It's gone beyond that stage.
Yeah, definitely. I think that like people over the last few years have really come up with some quite ingenious methods of making these deepfakes to make them extremely good, right? Because yes, our brains are very good at detecting them. Particularly faces, we're very good at recognizing a face doesn't seem quite right. And to some extent, the modern deepfakes still aren't quite right, and unless there's a lot of effort put into them, they might not be perfect, but they are getting better. And I think that definitely is a concern, and our brains aren't always. We're not totally infallible. Like we can get fooled by these things, and you're right. Like, particularly on social media, right? We all have a tendency to believe what we read a little bit, and I think that's just kind of part of being human. We're not very good at inherently thinking critically and being like, oh, maybe I should Google everything I read because it might not be true. But I think we're going to have to start doing that, right? I think that might have to be something that humans get more used to doing as AI fake information becomes more and more prevalent. And the other thing as well, right, is there's this big fear around like AI being used more in like scam calls, for example, right? Because you can imagine if someone manages to get hold of maybe your child's voice, for example, maybe they've recorded your child's voice. It might not be that hard to do, so they could probably install some malware on their phone or something and record their voice. And you can imagine them making an AI deepfake version of that person's voice, and then when they call you up, it could be your child speaking and saying, "Oh, I need some money," right? And then that's something like, "Oh, maybe it doesn't seem quite right," but then how would you tell, right? Would you have to start having code words with your children to be like, like, can you tell me your code word to make sure that we are, I'm not talking to an AI? And yeah, that might sound extremely dystopian, but it is kind of where we're heading, I think, honestly, in this world, which is yeah, it's really worrying, right? I mean, but hopefully, regulation from the government will improve over the next few years, because currently the regulation is pretty lacking, honestly, mostly because AI is moving so quickly and the government just simply isn't really keeping up right now. But we'll see. I am hopeful that the government will step in and make some decisions. I don't just mean the current government. I mean any government. I mean it's really a worldwide problem.
Yeah. That is True. And also, but the trouble is we've got the confirmation bias thing that people really want to believe the best about people that they like, the things that they know, and they want to think the worst about the things that they don't know. So they're likely to just be fooled so easily. Talking about the regulations, somebody said to me, jokingly, actually, it was a Facebook post. It's not real talking, is it? They said that maybe ChatGPT can solve the actor strike. Ha ha ha. I was like, maybe it can. So I put in a prompt, and it actually came up with some like really good regulations about how to make sure that ChatGPT and AI is. I mean, it was really good regulation and respect and all sorts of stuff. I mean, it does very much depend on the question you ask it, and I made sure to ask it a question that was loaded with give me the right answers, and that is the problem. It's the question, not the answers a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's true. And you have to remember that these models like ChatGPT, they don't really have a will of their own or anything like that, right? They're not trying to advocate for AI particularly. They're just trying to pretty much just reproduce the stuff that they already know, right? Stuff that's already in their data set. And if you ask them a question like, how can we make this thing safer, it will draw on the legal knowledge that it has in its data set, and it will come up with some kind of framework, but it doesn't really understand what it's saying. It's just kind of producing a human sounding reasonable response to the question you've asked it. Exactly. So it's definitely like, yes, it can be great for things like that. But also, I mean, there was that pretty famous thing that happened in America not too long ago where somebody used ChatGPT to do some actual legal work, right, in like a legal defense case. And that was really bad, right? It was really, really bad. It turns out that everything ChatGPT wrote was pretty much useless, and it ended up leading someone to I think get charged with something that they probably could have been fought harder against it, right? So it isn't fallible. ChatGPT is pretty it is fallible. It's not a particularly good thing for always telling the absolute truth, right? It's very, very good at reconstructing a human sounding response, but it's not always necessarily good at constructing the correct answer to any given question. And yes, it could give you something reasonable, but it's only drawing on stuff that other humans have already written. It's not thinking for itself or anything like that. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. You were talking about neural networks and everything in it, and how it's got all human knowledge, but research is breaking out of that. But it occurred to me that like 20 years ago, when they were even more a long time ago, when they were doing the chatbots, I got one from the front of a magazine, and you had to train it yourself. So everything that it taught you, you could see it developing. So you knew very much what you put in, but it came out with some. I wrote some poems with it, but they were my words that I trained them to make. So it's very much maybe the solution is that abandon it all and have it specifically. It's go, this is yours. You can put what you want in it, but don't do anything illegal, and make sure that you've trained it the way you want to, and put the information that is useful for you, because there might, and some a little bit extra, but you've trained it. You train it from the start, and just don't scrape the internet, possibly.
Yeah, I mean, so that kind of thing does exist. These sorts of kind of personalizable language models. So they don't start completely from scratch, because they have to start from a point at which they understand language, right? So they kind of they're sort of almost trained the whole way. But the difference is you can kind of imagine that when you talk to it, you sort of fine tune it. So you tune it to respond to you in the way that you want them to respond to you. And yeah, I think to some extent it'll always have the same problems, right? Whether it'll always be making stuff up, it's always trying to pull in new information from, like everything you've given it, it will still be trying to construct an answer from that, and that won't necessarily be correct. Even if you tell it a fact and ask it to reproduce that fact, it might still get it wrong, because it's just not built to do that, really. Yeah, I mean, I think that sort of thing would be quite fun, having your own chatbot that was personal to you. But then there's issues to whether or not, like, how useful really would that kind of thing be. Like, I'm not super sure that it would be as good as this sort of all-purpose one that is really the one they're trying to push out to us at the moment. This one that's trained on the whole of pretty much all of the internet's data. And the thing with it is kind of, as any one bit of humanity gets smarter, like as we get better at one thing, maybe medicine or whatever, this chatbot gets better at it, right? So the idea is that it can get better as the humanity as a whole gets better, rather than just us as individuals, where we can only learn so much. So there is a very big, well, it's kind of also what the Google guy who resigned, this guy called Jeffrey Hinton, who's a really famous Google engineer. When he resigned, he did some television interviews about his resignation. He talks about exactly that. He talks about how these chatbots, the reason he's quite worried about them is because they learn in a way which is like, it's kind of, as one thing gets better, they learn it. So they kind of, as humanity as a whole gets better, they get better. And it's very different to how humans were beforehand. It is a bit scary. Like it is quite worrying. Yeah.
Because I think the solution to this is, I mean, they need to abandon it now, because there's so much copyrighted material and stuff that people haven't given permission to at this stage, that you want to just go, no, get rid of it now, start again, work on stuff that is like in the public domain and stuff that people have given you permission to use. I mean, there is Creative Commons. If somebody has given you permission to use their work for some reason, then that's up to them. But you say that they do come with a pre-programmed understanding of. I was just thinking of way back in the day when there was text-based adventures and how frustrating they were when you go left, it's go do not understand, and you'd have to get the exact right words. But maybe there is an advantage to knowing the exact thing to ask rather than having all human knowledge.
I can see what you mean. I think the thing with these language models is kind of exactly that. I think they're always going to be a little bit limited to kind of the stuff they've been shown before, essentially. But what you raised about the copyright thing is a really important point, actually, because if you look at these big language models, they really do have some pretty questionable data sets, right? Their data sets are pretty much everything, including things like scientific journals, which were behind paywalls, that kind of thing, and copyrighted material, like definitely things like books and stuff. And it's like, really it draws into question whether what the AI is generating is actually like novel stuff, right? Because it's drawing on copyright stuff. And yes, it is new, but it's based on copyrighted material. And this is actually, I would say this is a bigger problem in the case of AI that generates art, for example, or drawings and stuff like that, because a lot of the time those drawings will be influenced by paintings or artists, right? And yes, they can create amazing, fantastic art in the style of any artist, but it's like, at that point, that artist didn't really give consent for their work to be used here. So, and is that AI generated thing, is that copyright by the artist? Well, no, it's not currently. And I think it is an entirely new thing faced by humanity. I don't think anything like this has ever happened before, really. So I think the legislation around it is pretty lacking. And I don't really think there's also an easy answer, because unfortunately, to train these models, you need a huge amount of data. And even particularly with these language models, I'm not really sure there is enough data that's completely public domain. Maybe there is, but it would be.
Sorry,
I'm sure it's. Go on.
It would. I cut you out too soon though. Yeah, but I think that doesn't matter. If you haven't got permission to it. The copyright laws are very simple. It's like 70 to 90 years after somebody's dead before you can use it. So you have to do that. You have to go. Doesn't matter how, because people are going to be exploiting this for their own personal gain in power and money and everything. So even though it's like, oh, well, look what we've built, we have to keep it. It's like, well, tough. I'm taking a hardline stance on this. I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's got to help us. It's like, yes, use it as a tool. But at this point, when you've taken other people's stuff without permission, that is theft. So it's fairly simple, really. It's not a complicated thing.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I do. I also think it's definitely wrong. But I think it's difficult for lawmakers because it's not quite as cut and dry. Where in a normal copyright case, that work would be reproduced somewhere, right? It would be the exact same work put somewhere else on the internet, claimed by somebody else, and that would be wrong because that would be direct plagiarism, right? But in this case,
you've put it in and you've used it, and you've made if you stole the Mona Lisa and cut it into pieces and stuck it in a collage, you've still stolen the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, but you could argue that if you go away and read 100 books by an artist and then write a new book in that style, that wouldn't be copyright. That would still be your work, right?
It wouldn't, because you haven't it's the brain, and it's a complicated thing. Your brain is you've got permission to use your own brain, so you do what you want.
I suppose, but then you could easily argue that the AI, it doesn't necessarily what law should the AI become, right? Because it's still just drawing on this different work and creating something new.
It's not got personhood.
Yeah.
No, because it is a corporate entity. When you've got this as it's owned by corporations, that corporation is exploiting people, and I think there shouldn't be. We should have laws so we're all protected.
Yes, maybe that. Yeah, maybe that's the fundamental issue, right? Maybe it comes down to we can't treat AI drawing on different sources and creating something new the same as we treat a person, for example.
You can't,
right? And currently there's nothing to stop that from happening, but maybe that's where the legislation needs to come in. I agree with you that I think it's wrong, and I think there needs to be protections around these things. But the current doesn't really exist any. Particularly, I think the words, the kind of the language models, it's not as much a problem, although of course it is still a problem. It's really big in the art world. I think this is that's where this is a really, really big issue. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you touched upon that it's good at lying, so it is basically good at being creative, and that is what you want to stamp out now. That is humanity. It's basically killed humanity. If you don't need to be creative anymore, then you don't need to exist anymore. That is life. Maybe not, but
I mean, I guess that's one. I guess that's one take on life for sure. I definitely don't disagree with you. That I think that is one. It's one of the most human things, right? Being the art of being creative, the art of things like writing poetry and writing prose and stuff like that. And it is upsetting that the AI is so good at it. Like, it really is. Like, if you ask it to write a poem, it can write a poem in 1 second that is good.
They're not actually,
it's impressive.
They look impressive if you don't know anything about poems, is the thing. They're like, wow, but it's like, and it is based on a lot of things. I don't know. They are getting
of course. I mean, but it's drawing on kind of a lot of humanity's poem experience, right? So it's creating a poem from like a collage of humanity, which in a way makes it can make very impressive poems. It can make very good poems, and that is, I mean, it is worrying. I mean, it's worrying that because it's going to put people out of a job. I think, maybe if a corporation is looking for a poem, for example, like some kind of promotional work, and before they would have paid a poet or something to write it, now they can get ChatGPT to write it in a second, and they can keep asking it different questions until they tune it to the one they want, right? And that's probably already happening, I imagine. So yeah, it is bad, and there should be protections around it, but there currently aren't really.
Oh, I know, it's terrible. I'm going to bring Caron to the discussion. It's going to be complicated with the echo, but I'm going to try and do it. So she might want to ask some questions too. So Caron, hello. You're not on. There you go. Turn yourself on. You've muted yourself, so I can't unmute you.
I did. There you go. Yes.
So have you got any questions to ask from the?
As I say, with jobs being made obsolete by the introduction of AI, I've recently been very curious about the role of the prompt writer and the prompt engineer. And do prompt engineers realize that they're really only attuning the language that AI will rely upon when it becomes completely conversational, and the prompt engineers get written out of the equation as well?
Fraser, you've got control of your mic. You can put it on and off, I think. All right. If I unmute it here, technology, eh? See, this is what we're worried about. This technology is going to destroy us all. You should be on now. Oh, I can't hear you. What's happened? I can't hear you, Fraser.
Yeah, sorry, it's me. I've got it.
All right.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all good. Yeah. Yes. So it's a good question. I think so these are prompt engineers, right? People who write these prompts. It's an interesting one because it is becoming a bit of a job. But it's kind of like, I'm not sure how long it will last as a job, because I feel like a prompt engineer is only necessary because we don't understand fully how to get the best out of these models yet. So you kind of have to figure out quite how to word the right question to get the best answer. And it's like at some point we're probably going to learn how to do that without the use of a person, basically. And like, yeah, I mean, there's also so this kind of whole thing of prompt engineering is also, it's like a way of getting around some of the filters in these models too. So if you ask a language model a question that's kind of dodgy, like, you know, how to make drugs, something like that, it won't give you an answer. It will refuse to answer the question, right? But if you tag it onto the end of something else, it will answer, and it will give you, you know, maybe it will write something and then it will put it inside, maybe say like, oh, write me a poem about making drugs or something like that, and it will do it, right? Actually, there was a paper that came out really just a couple of weeks ago that showed that, so before now they thought that there's these kind of, they call them jailbreaking, like jailbreaking the models to get these kind of this secret information out of them. They thought it was something that you could eventually stop. If you made a good enough language model, it would eventually be able to never, ever get fooled by these jailbreaking tactics. But some researchers proved that there's technically like an infinite number of jailbreaking statements you can use for a given model, which means that technically you can never stop it. You can always have ways to jailbreak models, which is really dangerous because it means that no matter like how good they think a model gets, people will always find ways around the filters to try and get like the horrible information out of them. So yeah, I don't know. I think the whole prompt engineering thing is definitely quite worrying.
So it's and we talked about education earlier, and there's a few videos that I've seen about the possibility of personalized teaching assistants that are engineered through the algorithm to attune themselves to the actual student themselves. So eventually teachers will become support assistants of the AI, and every child will have their own personalized AI that will guide them in an educational journey where those take them to. But those kind of the positive side of what AI can take us to, as opposed to the dystopian world. I'm looking forward to March next year at South by Southwest. Every year there is a technology lecture keynote done by Amy Webb. And Amy Webb is a technologist that examines the future of technology. And when March happened this year, and it included some AI, ChatGPT had only been around since the November in terms of the mainstream. So I'm really interested to see how that impacts her understanding and her organizations of what goes forward. I mean, that's a big marker of my year, what Amy Webb predicts the direction that we might be going in. So it's an exciting time, and having science and rationalism as part of the Edinburgh Fringe is a conversation that comes out through that. But I think the Fringe itself highlights some of these stories that are being told and the power of story, and that just doing a search for artificial intelligence on the Fringe program, there's 40 results of people that have got that artificial intelligence in their show note. So being able to get those stories have been important. So the stories, so you're doing a science and rationalism piece. Are there any AI pieces that you've seen that have stood out from the Fringe, and how is the Fringe experience going to affect your continued dialogue with your artificial intelligence work?
So just on one thing you mentioned earlier, you said about the kind of education being used in schools as like AI being used in schools as part of education, as part of like a teaching assistant. So I actually think that's a good thing, which might be, I'm not sure if people agree with that, but I actually I've done talks in schools where I've talked about ChatGPT, and I've talked about kind of how to use it best, basically, which I think is important. And basically the kind of feedback I've got is that, so a teacher, particularly in a state school, right, in the UK at the moment, a teacher might be split between 30 students, right, and they can really only help one or two students at a time. If a student's falling behind and they are struggling with a certain concept, there's only so much time a teacher can give them, right? But with these AI models, with something like ChatGPT, for example, every single student can access that, provided obviously they have access to it, if they have a computer or a laptop or something like that. And what that allows them to do is, yes, you can ask them to maybe explain a concept, which if you Google that concept, you might get a Wikipedia article, which is completely inaccessible for a 12-year-old. It might be like full of equations. It might be really horrible to understand. That's something I definitely experienced when I was 12 years old. I was definitely like, I'd Google something in physics and it would be a horrible Wikipedia article, right? But these days, a student can, yes, it can ask ChatGPT that question. Maybe the answer it gets back, it doesn't quite understand, but what it can do is it can say, oh, can you please simplify that for me? Or can I have this concept explained a bit better? Or can I ask this follow-up question? And then what they get is essentially like a level of education which it was prior to now inaccessible, right? And I think that is actually a really huge thing. I think that could really help people. And honestly, I think it's giving, particularly with things like coding as well, I think it's giving kids access to amazing programming help, which will never get sick of them. Which before now was not possible.
Is though, yeah, it's as a tool, it's very, I mean, like encyclopedias, anything that gives you knowledge outside. I mean, you have to do independent study. And that's the most important thing. I think what we really need to look at for teachers in the future, to teach students how to learn, to teach students how to independently question things. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the governments are really terrified of that. In a way, maybe with the drive towards AI, where all the facts are there for you, then people will hopefully will start to explore what it means to be human and what it means to be questioning of people. So it might completely backfire on the powers that be, whoever they are, in a way. Let's hope so, because otherwise, collapse humanity. If you can't, I mean, I think there was something about the Zoomers now. Zoomers, look at me talking about things like that they can't do the sort of technical stuff that like two generations, that's too far ago, a generation, people like millennials, whatever they're called, I can't keep up with this newfangled stuff. They were looking at how to build things from above. I know I was like building stack computers and stuff, and you'd get in there and you get the technical know-how, whereas now it's just there. You got the device, you don't need it. You don't need to open up the bonnet of a car to fix it. It's just there for you. So maybe it could be a good thing if people start to explore themselves and their own person more, in a way.
Yeah, there's the examination of humanity as we have it right now. We live in a construct that is founded on capitalism, that has a toxic political culture that desperately needs to change. There's a knowledge economy that is expanding from the technology economy, but ultimately the people that run the world don't want us to think, they want us to work. And that's something that we're going to have to wrestle through.
Yeah, and I would actually argue that capitalism is actually very incompatible with AI, right? Because what AI is doing is it's essentially, as it's getting better and better, it is kind of writing out the human component of jobs, right? And you'd think what that does is making all of us more productive, we get more stuff done. But unfortunately, rather than us getting paid more and having to work less, which would be really what's happening, because we're all producing more for the people we're working for, people get fired, right? People lose their jobs. And then suddenly you have the people owning the companies having to employ no people anymore and getting loads and loads of money. And then the working class having no money because they can't work. But then suddenly they have no money to spend on the products, right? Which means capitalism literally breaks down. There is no more, when humans cannot get employed because the AI is better, the system breaks. So it needs to change. Fundamentally, the AI, I think, needs to bring about a change in the system.
Yeah. But, I mean, the thing is, because there are people with vast amounts of money, and then everybody else, even if you've got a couple of million, you're everybody else at this stage, because what can you do with it? You've just spent it on an AI generating machine or something. So the trouble is, there is going to be a lot of inconvenient people because I think capitalism might have broken down a while ago, because it's all very rich people and everybody else. And that's not how it's supposed to work. So what is going to happen when the very rich people that have got all the resources in the world are faced with very angry people that have got nothing to do but eat and sleep and die on the street? It's going to be a catastrophe. The apocalypse. Oh my God. Your show is so relevant for today. Fraser.
Important conversation.
You made me panic. Whether you were trying to make people feel better or worse in your show. What do you think?
Well, I think when I wrote the show, I was quite worried. And I think it kind of comes across a bit in the show that I'm a bit worried about this stuff. And I think my main goal is to educate. I want people to leave being like understanding the dangers of AI and knowing exactly which bits they should be worried about, but also maybe leaving them a little bit hopeful about it, that it could be a good thing for us, but at present probably won't be, because there's just not the framework. The framework doesn't exist to make it a good thing, really, not in our current system. Yeah, that's the idea. So yeah, it's not meant to be reassuring particularly, but I'm hoping but most people seem to really enjoy it. So I think regardless, they leave being like, having their eyes opened a bit, basically. That's the idea. But yeah, and I know I didn't answer the question I asked earlier about whether or not other AI shows at the Fringe are like, what perspective I've got from those. And I haven't really seen too many, because I think most of them will be like, I think there's a comedy show which has used ChatGPT to write some of the jokes and stuff. And for me, I'm not the hugest fan of that, because I think I'm not going to criticize or anything, but I think it's a little bit of a, I guess maybe if it's done really well, it'll be good. But I haven't seen the show, but I feel like, it's, in a way, it's taking out the word hack. It's taking out I think it's taking out some of the core of the craft, basically, is what I'm going to say. I guess it's a bit of a novelty, and maybe it's quite funny now, but maybe 2 years time when people are doing it more, it's a bit like, okay, well, you've not written these jokes, you've got an AI to do it, and I don't really want to come and listen to an AI make comedy, right? I'd like to listen to a human make comedy. So I don't know. I don't want to be too critical of those people, because I understand that it is just a novelty. It is a funny idea, and I'm sure it is probably executed very well. And I've not seen the shows, so I can't be there saying that they're bad. I'm sure they are really good. But yeah, I think that concept, at least, of ChatGPT writing jokes, I'm not a big fan of, I guess, is what I'd say. But yeah, if everyone's got any thoughts on that, I'm up for hearing them. That's definitely not a be-all end-all opinion or anything.
It does, of course, depend what you do with it, and you don't know. It's like, as with everything, and also possibly maybe if it was all just facts and figures and an AI doing all the stuff, then there is a possibility of people pay. Well, this is it though, the premium of having a person do it. What a novelty to have a person doing your stuff. Wow, how rich am I that I'm a billionaire that I can give people jobs to do stuff and dance for me like little monkeys on a string.
The promotional component with at the beginning of the show, you're talking about the SAG-AFTRA strike. One of the main things that they're not doing is any promotional gigs. And even if you have an AI in your film that you've had to use technologists to make that work, and there's all the post-production, that person doesn't necessarily exist. And can that person actually go out and promote your film and be in front of the journalists and carry a cachet of fame and celebrity that people want to go and see famous people? Can an AI achieve that fame?
Well, the thing is, there is one very big agency in America that has digitized everybody on their books and has put in a contract that they can use them like AI little avatars, and they can advertise things. The thing is, that's dangerous. It's like that. I know somebody in equity that was like, "Oh, isn't it great? Will Smith can be in everything." And it's like, no, it's not, because not only can Will Smith be in everything, and if you really, Will Smith's not that popular at the moment, but somebody like Will Smith that was very popular and had done anything silly, he could be on every single thing. You wouldn't need Will Smith anymore. So what's the use of Will Smith? So Will Smith has become redundant, and Will Smith is not benefiting from this, and nobody is, except for the corporate entities that can just use one person or various different brilliant actors. Look, we can put them all in the same scene. This is not a great thing to do.
Humans get bored though as well. Even now, if a film star is in too many things too soon, people get bored and overloaded by them, and then they don't become popular.
Exactly, but they have digitized all of the people on their books, so all the famous people. I said to Fraser the other day that there's a rumor that Britney Spears, because in her all the papers that came up, that they had digitized, they'd taken lots of pictures, they've got her voice. A lot of the stuff that she's released in the last 10 years seems to be very AI, the actual songs. And is she completely, does she even exist anymore? And the people are worried.
I saw one of the YouTubers I watch is Justin Hawkins from I can't remember the band that he was in, but he has had The Darkness.
Yeah.
He's had fans generate AI songs in the style of him, and they go very popular. And the question that he was asked is, if people have had songs written about in their style and they become popular, would those performers perform them on stage in their concert? And he was kind of having a thought. He was going, would I? It's like, well, if they want to hear them and I sing it, and once I've sung it, the version that I sing becomes copied. And there was that talk about copyright and should you embrace fans writing fan fiction, essentially, that you can then sing. It's like, I haven't had to write it, but if they want me to perform it, then maybe I should. So it was a really interesting spin on that.
It is really, but I mean, the program that you've written it with, there's probably some sort of proprietorial like contract with the person, with the people, the company.
There's no copyright. There's no copyright at the moment.
Yeah.
So some graphic novels that have been written, the text, if it's an original story, has been allowed to be copyrighted, but the graphics were not. And then I think they even withdrew the copyright on that as well.
I think that's happened with a few art competitions.
Like
if you
Disney,
don't know about it, if it's so good that you don't know about it,
so
then
Disney and Pixar are not necessarily, say if you want to monetize something on a t-shirt, you're not going to generate it through AI because you would have no branding copyright on it. Anybody could then print your t-shirt, but if you've designed it in-house and it belongs to you, so I think there will be this split between stuff that is in the public domain AI and stuff that is brandable merchandise.
So hard.
Yeah, I don't know what Fraser thinks about that.
So hard. What does Fraser think about it? On that last note, we'll round you off with it. Fraser, what do you think about all of this, and what can you say about your show?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really actually get too into the weeds of all the copyright stuff in my show, but I agree that it's a massive problem. And like, I don't think really anyone has any idea about what the best way to tackle it is, because of course, if it was a human who was looking at some maybe Disney's work and then they drew their own Disney character or something, but it was like completely their work and they drew on Disney's work, then that would still be their work, right? If they could copyright it, it was their drawing. Yes, it's inspired by, but it's still theirs, right? Go on.
I just found it an interesting thing that anyone that designs a Pokemon and calls it a Pokemon, that is automatically owned by the company that makes Pokemon. I used to work for Pokemon magazine and I'd have kids sending in Pokemon pictures. I was just like, oh my God, they're all actually immediately copyrighted. It's interesting. Anyway, carry on.
But I guess if someone drew like a little cute animal that looks like a Pokemon, but they call it something else, right? Then technically it wouldn't, at that point it wouldn't be. It's not a Pokemon, it's my own thing, right? Then maybe that would then be owned by them, right? Because that
if you call it a Moki non.
Yeah, sorry, I think my Wi-Fi is coming out of it, but yes.
So call it a Moki non.
Yeah, exactly, right. And that's kind of my point. And the idea is that well, right now at least, if you show AI a bunch of pictures of Pokemon and then say draw something like it, then like, is that different from a human doing that, right? Which is what is the big problem at the moment. So yeah.
But Disney is famously litigious, so I'm pretty sure that they would definitely have something to say.
Can you guys hear me? I think my internet might be coming out right now.
All right, yeah. For instance, if you draw Mickey Mouse somewhere, even if you like working in a primary school or something, then Disney famously used to come after you. It's like, yeah, you've drawn that, but if it's recognizably Disney, even if it's a terrible drawing of Mickey Mouse, it's still recognizable enough to be Mickey Mouse. If it's recognizable enough to be a Pokemon. Anyway.
No, I do know what you mean, but I think I mean things which are technically novel, but just inspired by, right? Which is something that AI does, right? So it is a new thing, but inspired by old things.
Yes,
like for example,
and we're all inspired by the world, isn't it? We're all inspired by the world. Yeah, I had a friend on Facebook who put a post up the other day about how annoyed she was that she'd just read a load of Stephen King short stories, and how Stephen King had managed to write 10 years ago all of her original stories that she currently had in her head, and how dare he? It's like, damn it, they're not.
Yeah,
I thought I was having original stories, and no, I've just read Stephen King short novels, and they're all in there.
Yeah, exactly right. And I guess that's kind of the idea where it's like there needs to be a distinction between a human brain coming up with ideas and that being copyrightable versus an AI brain coming up with ideas, which are, it's kind of a similar process, but those ones, because it is a human, it's an AI directly drawing on other data. Maybe that then should not be copyrightable, right?
I think it was a dog or a monkey did a painting once, and it was ruled by law that it's not copyrightable because it's a dog or a monkey. So I think copyright and humanity is intrinsically linked at this stage in law. So
yeah, and I think that's probably the well, at least that's currently how it is. But yeah, maybe, I don't know. I feel like maybe an AI should be penalized for drawing on somebody's pictures, right? And maybe actually the original artist should own those pictures, I guess. And
of course.
It's very, it's difficult. And I think, but like, I feel like we all kind of agree that it isn't like, on this topic, but I think that the problem is it's just hard to write legislation around it, or at least people just haven't really done it yet. But I don't really talk about this in my show, but my show, I do go into all about these language models and about deep
What time is
and
it?
talk about how they work. It's at 3 p.m. today and tomorrow. Those are my last 2 days. If everyone wants to come along to it, it's at CC Blooms, which is it's just over Southbridge near the Omni Centre, which is a lovely venue actually. So if people want to come along, it's free to get in. So
Brilliant. That's amazing. Yes. And I can recommend it highly. It's very good indeed. And thank you very much, Caron. Thank you, Fraser. And I'll let you get on with your busy day. I'm sure you've got lots to do. So thank you very much. And bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye.
He didn't stick around.